Imagine a kangaroo taller than your house. Now imagine hunting it with a wooden spear. No rifle. No trap you could hide inside. Just you, your mob, and an animal that could kill you with one kick. This actually happened. On your country. And the animal wasn't even the strangest one on the menu. You've probably heard of Aboriginal Australians hunting kangaroos and emus. Ordinary stuff. But 40,000 years ago, before those familiar animals settled into the sizes we know today, this continent was home to something far stranger. Giant birds. Car-sized wombats. A kangaroo built like a boxer, standing over 2 meters tall. These were the animals your ancestors actually hunted. And the story of how they did it is one of the wildest survival stories on Earth. None of it involved metal. None of it involved horses or dogs or anything to give hunters an edge beyond their own bodies and their own minds. A fire-hardened wooden spear. A woomera, a simple handheld throwing stick that adds leverage and extra speed to a spear throw. And knowledge. So much accumulated knowledge that it's genuinely hard to picture from where you're sitting now on a device that didn't exist a century ago, let alone 60,000 years ago. Archaeologist Ian Davidson has spent decades studying exactly this kind of question. Not just what ancient people hunted, but how their minds worked while they did it. Planning a hunt for an animal that could crush you means holding a mental map of the landscape, predicting where an animal will move hours or days from now, and coordinating that plan with other people without a single word needing to be said out loud. That's not primitive behavior. That's some of the most advanced cognition on the planet, deployed against some of the most dangerous animals that ever walked it. Let's start with the biggest one, Diprotodon. Picture a wombat, then scale it up until it's the size of a small car. 2 tons of slow-moving, thick-skinned herbivore wandering the floodplains and woodlands of ancient Australia. It's the largest marsupial that ever lived. And for tens of thousands of years, it shared this land with the first Australians. You might think something that big would be too dangerous to bother with. But size wasn't the danger here. Diprotodon wasn't a predator. It was more like a giant wary cow. The real challenge wasn't strength. It was patience. Hunting an animal this size meant tracking it for days, reading its movement patterns, understanding where it drank and where it slept. Your ancestors weren't brute forcing their way through the ecosystem. They were studying it, generation after generation, until they knew it better than it knew itself. Archaeologist Judith Field has spent years digging through sites where Diprotodon bones sit close to human tools and evidence of fire. Her work doesn't show a single dramatic kill scene. It shows something slower and more interesting. A long, careful relationship between people and megafauna stretched across thousands of years. That's not the Hollywood version of cavemen hunting monsters. That's something closer to deep ecological knowledge, passed down so precisely it outlasted the animals themselves. Now picture something even stranger. A bird taller than you, too heavy to fly, with legs built like tree trunks. This was Genyornis newtoni, not an emu, not a cassowary, a completely different kind of giant bird, weighing well over 200 kilograms, roaming the same landscapes your ancestors called home. Here's where the evidence gets genuinely wild. Geologist Gifford Miller found something almost impossible to fake. Burnt eggshell fragments from Genyornis, scattered across dozens of sites throughout Australia. Not natural bushfire damage. Burn patterns consistent with cooking. Someone was collecting these enormous eggs. Someone was cracking them open next to a fire. One Genyornis egg could feed a family for a day. Imagine finding a nest that size out in the scrub and knowing exactly what to do with it. This is where the crazy animal question gets flipped on its head. It wasn't just about hunting the biggest, scariest creature you could find. It was about knowing which animals were worth the effort. A slow 2-ton Diprotodon might feed the whole camp for a week. A single giant egg might feed a family for a day, for almost no risk at all. Ancient Australians weren't reckless. They were calculating, patient, and precise. That's not what most people picture when they hear the word hunter. There's a debate worth mentioning here too, because good science doesn't hide its disagreements. Some researchers have questioned whether the burnt eggshell really proves human cooking, or whether natural fires could explain some of the burn patterns instead. That's how real evidence works. It gets challenged, tested, and refined, not accepted just because it makes a better story. What's held up across multiple sites, multiple decades, and multiple independent research teams is the broader picture. People and giant birds shared this landscape for an extraordinarily long stretch of deep time. There's a third animal that deserves its own moment, because it might be the strangest of all. Procoptodon goliath. A kangaroo, but not like any kangaroo you've seen. Over 2 meters tall, with a short, flat face and a single large toe on each foot, more like a horse's hoof than a kangaroo's paw. It didn't hop the way modern kangaroos do. Recent biomechanical research suggests it may have walked upright, on 2 legs, like something out of a myth. And yet it was real. It was here. And it shared the landscape with people who had to work out, through trial and error, exactly how fast it could move and exactly how close they could get. This wasn't just an Eastern Coast story, either. Archaeologist Peter Veth has spent his career studying how people survived in Australia's driest, harshest interior, where water might not appear again for 100 kilometres in any direction. Out there, hunting megafauna wasn't just about strength or courage. It was about water knowledge, stacked on top of animal knowledge. Knowing where a Procoptodon or a Diprotodon would need to drink meant knowing the landscape's secret map of soaks, clay pans, and hidden springs. 2 overlapping survival skills, both essential, both passed down together. So how do we actually know your ancestors interacted with these animals at all? This is where the dating comes in, and it matters, because without it, this is just speculation. Richard Burt Roberts is one of the scientists whose work anchors this entire timeline. He specializes in a dating method called luminescence dating. In plain terms, it measures the last time grains of sand were exposed to sunlight, which tells researchers how long ago a layer of earth was buried. Using this method at sites like Majid Bebe in Mirror Country in the Northern Territory, Roberts and his colleagues helped confirm that people were living in Australia at least 65,000 years ago. That's not a rounded-off guess. That's tens of thousands of years of overlap between humans and megafauna, long enough for real hunting knowledge to develop, be tested, and be passed down. Now picture the actual scene. Not a museum diagram. The real moment. Dawn. Red dirt, still cool from the night. A group moves quietly along a dry creek bed, following tracks pressed into the mud days earlier. No one talks much. Hand signals do the work instead. Somewhere ahead, a Diprotodon is grazing near a waterhole. Unaware, or maybe wary, its senses tuned to 1,000 small sounds. The hunters don't rush in. They circle. They wait. Fire might be used to guide the animal's movement, not to attack it directly, but to nudge it toward a place where a spear can actually do its job. This isn't chaos. It's choreography, built from knowledge so old it predates written language by tens of thousands of years. Children watch from a safe distance, not because they're told to, but because this is how the knowledge gets passed on. There's no manual, no diagram, just watching, again and again, until the reading of tracks and wind and animal behavior becomes instinct rather than instruction. By the time a young hunter throws their first serious spear, they've already spent years absorbing lessons they didn't even realize they were learning. Here's the twist, though. The thing that made ancient Australians such effective hunters of these giant animals is very possibly the same thing that ended up wiping those animals out. As human populations spread across the continent, as fire became a more deliberate tool for shaping landscapes, and as hunting pressure combined with a drying climate, megafauna populations began to collapse. Scientists still debate the exact mix of causes, and honestly, that debate is part of what makes this such good science. Climate change certainly played a role. The Ice Age was already reshaping rainfall and vegetation across the continent, drying out the very waterholes and grasslands megafauna depended on. But the presence of skilled, adaptive human hunters, arriving on a continent where giant animals had never faced anything like this before, is part of nearly every serious explanation. Unlike predators, these animals had evolved alongside for millions of years. Humans were unpredictable, coordinated, and constantly improving their methods. That's a combination no giant wombat or flightless bird had ever had to out-evolve. It's worth saying plainly, this isn't a story about blame. It's a story about consequence. Every population on Earth that has ever hunted large animals has, eventually, reshaped the ecosystem around it. What makes the Australian story remarkable isn't that megafauna disappeared. It's how long the overlap lasted before they did, and how completely the knowledge system built around that overlap survived anyway, adapting to a changing world instead of vanishing with it. Sit with that for a second. The animals are gone now. Diprotodon, Genyornis, Procoptodon, all extinct, existing only as bones in red dirt and reconstructions in museum halls. But the knowledge that let people track, understand, and live alongside them didn't disappear. It transferred. It adapted to smaller, faster prey. Kangaroos, emus, fish. The same patience, the same reading of tracks and seasons and animal behavior carried forward across tens of thousands of years, right up to today. And here's where it lands on you. You probably don't hunt megafauna for dinner. But think about the last time you had to read a situation carefully before acting. A negotiation. A tricky conversation. Waiting for the right moment instead of rushing in. That instinct, patience over impulse, observation over force, isn't some modern skill you picked up from a self-help book. It's ancient. It's the same cognitive toolkit that let a small group of people, armed with wooden spears and generational knowledge, coexist with two-tonne wombats and flightless giants for tens of thousands of years. You inherited that, whether or not you ever notice it working in the background. Think about it differently for a second. Every single skill your ancestors needed to survive alongside these animals, patience, observation, risk assessment, delayed gratification, reading subtle signals in your environment, is still wired into you today. You just use it for different things now. Reading a room instead of reading a track. Waiting out a difficult moment instead of waiting out a wary Diprotodon at a waterhole. The scale of the threat has changed completely. The underlying wiring hasn't changed much at all. So next time someone asks what animals ancient Australians hunted, don't just say kangaroos and emus. Tell them about a two-tonne wombat the size of a car. Tell them about a bird too big to fly, and eggs big enough to feed a family. Tell them about a kangaroo that might have walked upright like something from a dream. And tell them, the real story isn't about the size of the animal. It's about the patience of the people who hunted it, and just how far back that patience actually goes. That giant kangaroo you imagined at the start, taller than your house, hunted with nothing but a spear. It wasn't a myth. It was Tuesday.